Thank you, Rod and Franca, for inviting me. My aim today is really to get people excited, students excited about linguistic landscaping, and I'm trying to keep it as current as possible and as interesting as possible. So you're going to see some images that you might be quite aware of, something that's very topical, and then I'm also going to like load on some theory, but I want to keep it as interactive as possible. So you are free to interrupt me at any point if you want some clarification. You can also use the reaction keys. I know we have it on Zoom, so I assume we have it here as well. If you'd like to get my attention, or if you, yeah. So that's how we're going to do it. So let's start. Let me just make sure that this is going to work. Okay, so I'm used to Zoom, but let me just see if I can get this. Okay.
So I mean, at the bottom of your page, you see.
Yes, I've got present now.
You see an arrow, present now.
Yeah, so but then I don't see the. Let me just see. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Yes, I see it now. I'm one of those academics right now, looking for the slides. So let me pull it up, and then Rod, just let me know if you can see it. Oopsie. So can you see this right now?
Yes, it's starting to show, yes.
Okay, awesome. So I can't see myself, but I assume that that's okay, and we can go ahead. And if you lose me at any point, Rod, please let me know. Okay, so okay, awesome. So this workshop is on linguistic landscape research methods. And what I've got here already in this cover slide is just a snippet of how diverse this field actually is. Okay, so this image of a woman's form on my right is one of the ways that bodies were mapped in one of the studies with my students. And then I've got one of my favorite comedians, Dave Chappelle, but who has gotten into hot water recently because of what he's done on Netflix. But what is important to linguistic landscaping is how he defines the virtual space. So he said something quite interesting recently. He said that he was being dragged on Twitter, but he doesn't care because Twitter's not a place. And so many of the linguistic landscape researchers that are interested in the virtual space will say, okay, maybe for you it's not a place, but it is definitely a place for millions of other people. And so I'm going to be looking at the physical built environment of landscapes, but I also want to move into the virtual space where I live. I know many of you live as well. If you've got a YouTube channel, those of you later on that's watching this on YouTube, you have a YouTube channel, then you have Instagram, Facebook. There's so many ways that people are living and experiencing life online. So that's the virtual linguistic landscape, which I will discuss later on. So I'm going to also talk about the kind of conferences that we've had. So to give you a feel of what's been happening so far. And again, I can't see any comments as yet. So Rod, you can just let me know if there is any. So let me give you the most cited definition of linguistic landscaping by Landry and Bourhis, and that is the language of public road signs, advertising billboards, place names, street names, commercial shop signs, public signs on government buildings of a given territory, region, or urban agglomeration. So that was
Sorry to interrupt you, but you didn't pass on the slide. We're seeing the same slide. Is that it?
Oh, are you not seeing the slide that I'm showing now?
We can see the slide. We can see the first slide.
Maybe it's frozen.
Okay, let me just see what I can do here.
I think you are already on the second slide. Oh, there it is. There it is.
Yeah. Yeah, but I would like to see. the whole. So you guys can see that plus the panel on the side.
Yes.
Yeah, because if you go full screen, you won't be able to pass your slides. You know.
Would you like me to pass the slides for you?
Oh no, I'd like to do it myself. Can I just try again and just see if it'll work maybe?
Yeah, of course.
So you can see the slide because I've just put it on.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll try again in a few minutes. Otherwise, I'll just give up and show you the other one. So this particular definition of linguistic landscaping in 1997 was quite radical, if you think about it, because it spoke about language everywhere. So what I asked you guys to go through was two very different papers, myself and Christopher Stroud, as well as Backhouse 2006. And I wanted you to look at the differences that you can see in the way that the linguistic landscape was spoken about and the way it was approached, methodologically. So I'm going to get to that in a moment. But this definition of linguistic landscaping has evolved. And so this is why we can talk about tattoos on the body and emotion and place and so many other things, and the virtual space as well. So I'm going to just try and see, can you see this change? If not, I will go back. So I've got a new slide on that I can see.
No.
No,
nope.
we're
Okay.
still seeing. And now yes, now yes, now
yeah.
yes.
So I'm going to leave it like this. I'm just going to have to do that. Okay, so there's not going to be many animations now, but that's fine. So for those of you that have read the papers, good. If you have any comments, you can put it in the comment box, or you can just mention it. But the main differences was in 2006 was that this was a very quantitative look at the landscape, and it looked specifically at official signs and non-official signs, which is quite helpful when you're starting out looking at the linguistic landscape. And what was so interesting was how multilingual signs were constituted. So how did they figure out what multilingual signs were? And that was basically any sign that didn't have Japanese on its own. So that was very interesting. And they looked at power. Backhouse looked at power versus solidarity and found that non-official signs were more indicative of solidarity. And then on the Skinscapes paper, which I can tell you now, and I think this is critical for those that are interested in this field, myself and Christopher Stroud, we were on tenterhooks. We weren't sure if the linguistic landscape field would be interested in looking at the body as a corporeal linguistic landscape. So we took a chance and we wrote this paper, mostly because in South Africa, we have the situation where, as many of you may know, we have these different racial groupings, and to understand how people fit into place, we often or feel out of place is one of the things that we're trying to figure out, and we're obviously trying to bring people together. And in our context, the bodies are often spoken about in terms of colors, like, the shade of the color and the hair and texture and so forth. And I think that's very similar, I guess, to your context as well. And so we wanted to move away from that and look at the body in different ways. And so we looked at the body in terms of how it is authored by the tattoo customer. And so we looked at affect and how people spoke about their bodies. And if you went through the paper, you'll see 5 vignettes, and it's quite a nice way of looking at how people imagine themselves in terms of how they want to inscribe their body. And we also, we had interviews, ethnographic interviews, lots of field notes. I've never been so long at a tattoo parlor. For somebody that doesn't have a tattoo, yeah, I definitely know my way around a tattoo parlor now. And we also allowed for an innovative methodology where we put the camera on the tattoo artist's head. And so we watched as he inscribed the body as well, and the sort of relationship he was having with the person during that time. And so we ask, what role does place and space and inscription and social class play in the study? So you will find that what was most interesting for us is that unmarked bodies are also marked depending on the intention of the the motion and the navigation and the life of the person as well. So, for example, we use the principal who wanted to get tattooed on his forearm, but he worked at one of the most prestigious schools in Cape Town, and so he was advised not to do it because it would limit his employment. And he was not happy about that. But what it showed was that it was his unmarked arm, which was marked in terms of social class. So if you are from a certain social class, you would not have a tattoo, which is highly visible. If there's any questions at this point, please do ask, okay? So that I want you to see the very big difference between these two studies, and know this, that quantitative studies are still very much done today, and they're quite helpful, but so are qualitative, sort of more ethnographic studies. Is there a question, Rod?
Yes, I had a question. Yes, now I was paying attention to what you're saying, but my question slipped through my mind, but it just came back, I guess. Let's see if I can word it.
Sure.
Well, yes, now I remember. I've done some work on some research on linguistic landscapes, with Branca specifically, and especially the issue of race, and something that strikes me a little is that well-established dichotomy between top-down and bottom-up signs. What do you think of that analytical division?
So that's actually something I'm going to touch on in this presentation, because it's one of the things that we also, so it's a very good question to ask, because it's one of the things that we seem to have to, we come across it a lot, where we're not too sure where to put it. And I'm going to give you an example where it's quite like midway. So I'm gonna have to just pause you there, Rod, and get to it in a bit. But yeah, I will definitely get to that.
No problem. There is a question on the chat.
Yeah. Okay.
Marcelo Leal asks you to talk a little bit about what is the role of emotions to space making.
So I'm going to touch on this as well, but let me just go into it right now and say that one of the biggest questions about linguistic landscaping is what is a place? How do we actually differentiate between space and place? And the main thing is that you need a human body, a human intention. And so the human comes with emotions. The human comes with feelings of being in and out of place. And we are the ones that make, as Tim Criswell says, space meaningful. So emotion is extremely important. Like, for example, if I have to choose your context, where you have very different views from the state about vaccinations versus perhaps in the home. And so if you look at a sign which is anti-vaccinations, you might have a very real emotional response to that, a visceral response. And that is important, because that's what makes us human beings. And that's what causes people to effect change and start a revolution. And, this is the thing that we cannot escape from. And I'm so glad that you asked the question, because in the virtual space, the way people have been studying it, it's almost like, we don't actually want to get into it. We just want to talk about multimodality, which is also fine. But I think it's important to really figure out how people are making place there. And so I'm going to address that in a bit. But without a doubt, emotions are not removed from people. And without people, we cannot talk about place. So thank you very much for that question. It's lovely. And you guys are like helping me along with this workshop, which is awesome.
And there are also, just to chime in with the issue of emotion, there are also specific spaces that produce specific emotions, that you are expected to have those emotions in those specific spaces. Think of the cemetery, for example.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I think in South Africa, where we had spaces where we couldn't go, we were not allowed to go because we were not white, which is like the beaches and the beautiful areas. When apartheid ended in 1994, people were still were able to move there, and we had access, but no belonging.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that we are still grappling with. And that's why I'm not too sure if I'm going to be speaking about linguistic citizenship here, but just the idea of finding a way to belong in the place where you are is critical to our sense of humanity and our sense of self.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that apartheid took away from us. So yeah, absolutely. Some places make us feel out of place because it wasn't built for us. And Sunny Bock and Christopher Stroud did this wonderful chapter on zombie landscapes. And what they were talking about was that some places leave traces of the power dynamics. And unfortunately, for many of the South Africans that are black includes colored and Indian, they still feel that they are out of place, even though they can park wherever they want to park, watch the movies, go jump in the ocean. They don't feel a sense of belonging. And that is something that we're trying to get to. And maybe there's something similar happening in Brazil. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but,
of course. And also issues of gender, right? There are places women feel more unsafe than men, for example.
Oh, yes. And that is something, just to go back to Dave Chappelle, though, whether you agree with him or not, I'm not going to get into that conversation, but it does bring up the sort of the conversation about, gender and place. Like, is this a place where we can talk about gender in this way, in a comedic fashion? And the answer is, I don't know. I'm not a comedian and I'm not going to comment on that, but he definitely opened a lot of discussion on that. And perhaps that is for a different day. I think that would be a very interesting discussion.
Branca has a question.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering, how you bring in the idea of movement into linguistic landscape, because if bodies are linguistic landscapes, when they move, tattoos move with them, for example.
Yes, yeah. Another great question. So we do talk about bodies as mobile, corporeal linguistic landscapes, but I think what is so important is that movement happens perhaps from, South Africa to Brazil, but movement also in terms of temporality, in terms of maybe looking back at your tattoo 5 years later and realizing, as one of the participants in my study, he looked back, and because it was a tattoo of a dragon on his inner thigh, he felt that it was quote unquote gray, and he didn't want to change it because he didn't want it to get bigger. And so what was cool 5 years ago, not 5 years, 10 years ago, was uncool for him. And so he actually, at least with regards to that space on his body, he did not grow in that sense. It became fragmented. And that's why we talk about how different parts of our bodies are fragmented into certain social figured worlds in our imagination. But absolutely, bodies are mobile. And I feel it most when you're at the airport, which I think a lot of people haven't been at the airport for a long time. But that's where our bodies are read in a very different way from what we used to. I remember going somewhere, and then the border control official asked me, he just said to me, Spanish, French. And I looked at him and I said, I'm South African and I speak English. So he couldn't, so he was reading my body completely wrong. But yeah, I think mobility was also captured by Jackie Lowe and Adam Jaworski quite nicely in the programmatic paper on words we wear. And so they really looked at signs on the body as mobile, even though they didn't do any qualitative interviews that I can recall, but it was an amazing paper which shows, which links it up to politics and gender. And so there's so many ways of looking at mobility as opposed to just the physical, movement. But yeah, that's something that I don't actually cover too much in here. But if there's anything that but Branka, if I didn't answer your question properly, please do let me know so that I can.
No, yes, you did. I was just wondering whether other signs, apparently more static, on walls or signs in the street, whether they could be considered mobile when we take into account people interacting with them, because their interaction is always different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in that case, the answer would be yes. And also, when you take a picture and then you upload it to Instagram, it has a different lifespan, and it's frozen in time. And so that's also quite interesting. And so the words we presentation and paper that Jackie Lowe and Amiena did, they also had a link to their Instagram page, which was very interesting because that had a different narrative, it had a different agenda. And so so you're absolutely right. When you take a picture of an image, if you capture an image of a static conventional sign and you put it somewhere else, it does definitely create a new meaning. So thank you for that. And then I want to show you this. You're welcome. And then I want to show you guys something that is like very very cute. And that is that during COVID, we had a very hard lockdown level 5, which was that none of us could leave our houses. The only movement that there was the refuse, the people that would come once every second week, not every week even. And so what happened was in Simonstown, where this picture was taken, which is a little bit out of Cape Town, because of the lack of people, penguins were seen walking, traversing the streets. And what was so interesting is that this over here, this cul-de-sac, there's no entry sign, a road sign, if you guys can see it here, with the red line on top. That had no meaning anymore because there were no movement, no cars. You had to have a permit in order to leave your house. And so suddenly these animals were taking over the landscape. And it just showed me, and I think other linguistic landscape researchers, how interesting it is that the sign systems that we built and we so sophisticated meant absolutely nothing during level 5. And we, as as human beings, had to stay indoors, and we were captive in a way. And level 5 lasted quite a few months, and I think it was probably very good for the environment as well. But it also goes to show that some signs lose their meaning depending on the context, and I'm sure this happened as well for you guys during COVID.
There is a question related to this topic here. So Rebecca Atkinson says the following: I recently had to spend time in a government-designated quarantine hotel. Could you comment on how the theory of linguistic landscapes would approach an analysis of that situation? An analysis of stasis, of unmobility.
Firstly, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But one thing that I would do is, if that was me, and it's also something that I'm going to be talking about later on, but I will definitely touch on it now. And that is, in order to talk about the linguistic landscape, when you're stuck in quarantine, I take it's 4 walls, is to consider perhaps adopting an autoethnographic approach where you write yourself into the landscape. We haven't seen many of these studies, but you will see one of mine coming out at the end of this year. Rod is very well aware of it. And so autoethnography is amazing because it allows you, first of all, it has a cathartic effect, which means that you feel better once you've done it, but you link your current situation to a greater macro issue. So if you wanted to talk about the moment of stagnation or feeling of being stuck or being controlled by systems outside of your, external to you, then you could definitely adopt an autoethnographic approach. And I think it would be amazing if you did that, because then the the reader would find it would be a lot more accessible, and then you bring yourself into the picture. So you don't just take pictures of your quarantine room, but you actually talk about how you write about how you feel in those spaces, and how and what the limitations are, what do you lack now all of a sudden. So so I think autoethnography is a beautiful way, if you are willing, to bring yourself into the picture and to show how you made that space a meaningful place during the time that you were in quarantine. So that's something that I would suggest.
Or maybe the opposite, right? How you weren't able to make that space into a place. Especially in this case, because it was a hotel. So the impersonality of the whole thing.
Yes, absolutely. But even though it's like you're in a hotel, I'm sure there's something that reminds you of yourself. You know, maybe it's your robe or your toiletries, or the way you arrange your breakfast, what you order. That is still you, but it's you, as you rightfully say, Rod, in a very uniform, confined space. So that would be a very interesting paper if you are interested.
So Rebecca, that's a very good idea for a paper.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so let's take a journey into linguistic landscaping. So I'm just going back a few years. So we had the Xscapes, which is a wonderful conference in Bern, Switzerland. And what I liked about it was, and why I'm mentioning it here, is that it had a non-thematic theme. So the X in that theme symbolized the number 10, which is 10 years of the workshops, conferences of linguistic landscaping. Also, it was the idea that it's unknowable, like we don't know what's coming. And this is the thing that I absolutely agree with when it comes to researching linguistic landscaping. And I've actually got a picture here of a black hole. I give this analogy to my students, a lot when I talk about linguistic landscaping. If you have to look up in the dead of night at the night sky, there is no way you can find a black hole. A black hole is only noticeable and detected by the light that swirls around it as it gets sucked into the black hole. So linguistic landscaping sometimes is very obvious, but other times you have to look at things that are happening around the landscape in order to understand it. So it's not just a sign, for example, it's the emotions that the sign invokes within the viewer or the reader, or even the sign maker, which is important. So sometimes we don't just look at, and that's why we should never decontextualize signs. We should know what the context is, who took it, why, and how did they feel, and all of those things. So I love this analogy of the black hole, because sometimes when you're doing linguistic landscape research, it feels like that. It feels like a black hole. And you're wondering, am I on the right track? But because this field is extremely interdisciplinary, there's something for everyone. So some people like analytical sort of studies where everything's quantitative and coded. That's not me. And some people like things that are more relationship based and affect laden. And so there is space for you there as well. And then the next linguistic landscape conference was very different, and it looked at specifically East meets West. And so there was like this shift in terms of, well, linguistic landscape, as looking at two very different spaces. I wasn't actually at this conference, but it just also shows you like the shift over the years. And then, of course, Gothenburg was cancelled because of COVID. It was very sad, but we had it on Zoom in September of this year, and it was amazing. And the reason why I'm showing this is because this is part of the landscape, that the virtual landscape that was constructed by Tommaso, Johan, and To, when they had to say, look, we're moving it now, we're completely online. And they had it was a massively successful workshop, and with lots of different panels. And that also speaks to the diversity of the field. So I have a few questions here, but I don't think that this might be applicable right now. But maybe just do one thing. Promise me you won't look at your phone and answer your phone, but look at your phone for a second and just consider the apps that you've downloaded because of COVID. Just take 2 minutes to do that. Anything new on your phone?
I've downloaded lots of shopping apps, things that I didn't used to do before the pandemic because I like to go shopping.
There we go.
So thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of shopping apps. That's what mostly changed in my life in terms of practices and using my phone to do things.
Yes. So that's spot on. I don't know why I didn't think about shopping apps, of course. Yeah.
I've downloaded just one. Mm-hmm. It's got nothing to do with shopping. It has to do with health. The one from SUS, you know.
I have that. SUS is our national health system.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see.
Just that one.
Well, and it's a very critical one by the sounds of it as well. But so for the students, you might find that you've now downloaded other social media platforms just to be in touch, or you might find that you deleted them because you found it too toxic. So that's possible. But either way, you either expanded your virtual linguistic landscape consciously, or you reduced it because of whichever reasons. But I want you to think about the linguistic landscape as starting way back before your phone. And one way of looking at it, and this is a picture of the Bushman caves in southern Africa. And this is one of the examples of the very early linguistic landscape. And linguistic is not used in the conventional narrow sense of language per se. As you can see, these are images, but it really encapsulates everything. So it includes images and other modes as well, and color and so forth. So this would be part of the landscape of how we decode where we are. And then I've got this really wonderful image of, yes.
Can I interrupt you at this point?
Sure.
Very quickly, because you just raised a very important point for us here, because in linguistic landscape is everything that is in the public space, right?
Yes.
I just recently read a paper by David Carlander, in which he discusses that what is not there, the erasure, what is erased from the linguistic landscape is also interesting. He's studying graffiti. So he studies how local governments try to erase graffiti and what this kind of action tells about the local culture of producing place or transforming places into spaces. So I think that's also a nice point too.
Absolutely. And thank you. And that you're absolutely right, shows how it's not language in the conventional space. If you think about graffiti, sometimes it's quite abstract, but it certainly plays a role in how we understand where we are or even who we are. And when it gets erased against our will, it also speaks to the kind of world that we're living in and how they are, I don't want to say dehumanizing but really, erasing, the person and what they bring to that space. So David.
Rodrigo, erasing and juxtaposing too, both.
Yeah, he discusses only erasing. He calls that the semiotics of non-semiotics. The semiotics of what is not there. But I guess overlapping and juxtaposing should also be
absolutely, yeah.
Like my student Rafael and I have studied how bathroom graffiti at the university here are constantly juxtaposed. So people erase and clean the walls, and then people go there and write over what had been there. So as the cleaning staff can never actually erase everything, so it's like a palimpsest of messages. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and this attempt to erase graffiti as transgressive, it's so interesting for me because, of course, there are different angles and ways of looking at it. And I think David's work has been quite exciting because I remember he did this almost minute by minute, see, thing, yeah, minute by minute analysis of a train station and the graffiti artists and what they were doing there, and it's very exciting. So for those students that are thinking, what can I possibly research in linguistic landscaping, I would say anything that really interests you, because there's quite a lot of different ways that we can approach the landscape. So you can even do, for example, an analysis of drag performance. That in and of itself is also possible. Like we see a graffiti. I think it's Rebecca who spoke about staying in quarantine. If you do an autoethnographic sort of analysis, that will also fall into linguistic landscaping. So in a way, the best way to understand is that we are storytellers. Linguistic landscape researchers are storytellers, and we are lucky because we have images to help us tell our story. And so if you have something that really pulls at your heart and you think, this is a subject that I need to cover, then I would say, ask yourself, do I need to do a quantitative or qualitative study? Okay, and then you start from there and then you look at your data. And by all means, you can always email me or DM me on Instagram if you want to. I'm quite alive there. And then we can discuss different ways that you can look at research, because one thing is true, it's that it's quite interdisciplinary and there's lots of room for different ways of looking at data. So some of the things that are some of the different linguistic landscape items I'm displaying here, for example, a street sign, sculptures, as well as the tattoo over here, and then the shop face sort of name is something that a lot of people do, and they look at languages and varieties of language and the different modalities used, and so it can be quite exciting. And so then I do this with my students. So I just want to remind you, of course, that a sign, when we talk about signs, this is the definition. Okay, it stands for something other than itself. It has meaning, and it's not the real thing. And that in that way, a sign can be many things in linguistic landscape research. And so there's quite a lot of material out there that you can draw upon. See, a visitor here. That you can draw upon. And I just want to bring your attention to the Linguistic Landscape Journal, which has done quite a lot in bringing out different work in this particular field. And so when people talk about it, they're not sure what it is that they are actually getting themselves into. I would say it's an interdisciplinary area of research. It's still quite a niche area, even though it's growing. It's growing in a very rhizomatic fashion, which means, as you can see here, it's going left, right, up, down. And this is what we want. We don't want to nail down how you tell your story. So in the recent Linguistic Landscape 12 conference, which was online, we had people talking about what's happening in the Middle East, and especially what's happening, for example, with the Palestine-Israel situation. And it was quite interesting, but also it was groundbreaking in the sense that we got the kind of information that we really don't get usually in mainstream media. And that is the advantage of being a linguistic landscape researcher, and doing research in your own backyard cannot be overstated. There's a lot that can be done there. So now we're getting into top-down and bottom-up. So top-down signage is official signage, and it was in one of the papers. So you can see that you have what they call code preference. So you'll have, even though there's 3 languages here, let me just speak to it a bit. Waarschuwing, that's Afrikaans. Caution is English. Isilumkiso, that's isiXhosa. And then you have this big sign at the end, which is in English. So even though the English text is at the bottom, it still has the preference. It still has preference because it's bigger. And then also these were the official signs that came during lockdown level 5. Why stay home? Coronavirus spreads when we come into contact with those infected. So there was quite a lot of fear at the start of the first wave. Now we're into our third wave and we're expecting the fourth wave in December. And so people are quite afraid with with corona, and I think a lot of people, the fear has died down because people are getting COVID, but they're also recovering. So that is quite a relief. And I think I'm going to skip over a few of these slides because, as you can see, I've got 64, but that's because I like to have lots of options. But just to show you, this is an example of a shop front in observatory. And then also signs in magazines and on billboards are also signs that we can analyze, but you will have to obviously contextualize it within a particular framing. And then if you look at linguistic landscapes and clear examples of power, that would be, for example, this one, which was at a Cameroonian campus. It says, you can read there for a moment. So signage is made up of objects that may tell us about the power relations and language hierarchies. This one is quite explicit. No pigeon on campus, please. English is the password, not pigeon. So you can obviously see that English is preferred over Cameroonian pidgin English. And then also this sign, non-European women, and so forth. And then we have these signs, which we give to our undergrads to take a look at. So I want to give you a moment. The sign is of a school, Kukanile Primary School. And you'll see there it says Ginga Smart, Yetia Smart. So I think if my translation is correct, it's eat smart, be smart, something like that. And then you see the barbed wire at the end. Now in South Africa, it is quite normal for us to have billboards of food at a school, you know, and that helps the school to actually make money in a way. And so the barbed wire is also indicative of the crime levels, for example. And then on my right, there is Yebo Exhaust Fitment Center. And this one is a handmade sign for a local business in Khayelitsha. So this is from the Stroud and Williams paper, I forget which year. But they look at the materials used the materials used for the sign. And in this case, you actually see it's made of metal. And the words at the end, so there's lots of orthographic errors, but it's quite aspirational as a fitment center. So we'll ask our students, and perhaps students themselves later on can ask themselves what material was used, which language varieties. Okay, that might be a bit difficult. So you could see there's English and isiXhosa. Why do you think they were selected? Remember, if you are in Khayelitsha, which, let me give you some background, is a township in Cape Town, where there are thousands of people living below the breadline, and there are 250 people for every one police officer. So there's quite a lot of crime versus, for example, 20 people for every one police officer in more affluent areas. So what you see here is, of course, there's different materials, but it also speaks to like the socioeconomic status of the people that live there. And then this sign is interesting because what we see here, we don't know which one comes first, but you see a top-down sign with a bottom-up sign. And this is what I enjoy showing. So the top-down sign, we know it is top-down. There's quite a lot of investment. These are straight lines. Somebody paid someone to print this. And there's even an instruction, a caution, 24-hour tow away. And then you have this one, which is graffitied. Funk you, motherfunker. So I'm not swearing, it says funk you, motherfunker. And you see that there's this relationship between these two. I don't know if this one is telling the other one to shove off, but it would be interesting to know that. Rod, is there a question or a comment?
Yes, I do have a question. It is about the top-down and bottom-up conceptualization. So this sign here is strictly no parking. Doesn't seem to be a government sign.
No.
It's probably the owner of that space that paid for this sign to be designed and placed there. Can we still call this a top-down sign?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because I think that's one of the characteristics of top-down is that there is significant capital investment. So somebody paid money in order to get this sign done, and you can see that was the case. But I agree with you in the sense that it could have been put there by the owner who had money to do that, and so it would be somewhere in the middle, I would say. If you use that, if you refine it more and say, you know what, it's not just the investment that we're looking at. We're also looking at who created the sign, who instructed the sign be put there. And I think that's we need to refine top down and bottom up for sure going forward in linguistic landscaping, because I think there's a lot that is kind of more in the middle and not as clear cut, because you're right, this is not a government sign.
Maybe one way to look at it would be that top-down signs, or what I call top-down signs, would have been designed as an attempt to exert some kind of power in the population, the movement of the population, while bottom-up would be more grassroots, would be more kind of resistant, maybe. Well, at least in this case.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. And I think if you think about it, top-down exerting power so that to hamper movement, I have a feeling, because this was taken in observatory, that they would see that as a top-down sign, because at the time there was a very sort of radical movement going on. Actually, they call themselves the movement, and so they would see that as somebody trying to instruct them how to live their life. But I get what you're saying, and I agree with you that I think more refining of this top down and bottom up, and I'll show you in a moment, where I also think this is more of a gray area, and exerting power to the masses, I think, is one way of saying for sure that is top down. Yeah. And so then we had this sign, which was very interesting as well. And you can see that the word here, supermarket, is actually just pasted over the actual store name, the previous store owner, which was called Indulge. It was an ice cream shop. And so what was interesting for me was the lack of sort of personality and identity. And when I went into the shop, I noticed that they were Somali owned. And because of the xenophobia of 2008, which was very bad at the start of my PhD, nobody wanted to identify in terms of their transnational status. Whereas if you were South African or Asian, it was fine to be, as you saw earlier, Mr. Lin's sushi restaurant. That was fine, but if you were Black, transnational, transnational business owner, it was a no-go zone. You did not want people to know who you were. And so Felix Banda and I discussed this and conceptualized this as sort of brand anonymity. So you still have the branding of Coca-Cola, but it's there to anonymize you. And in that context, it made you safe. And unfortunately, I think that we see is quite prevalent in South Africa. And then also what happened as time went on in linguistic landscaping, at first it was a free-for-all, I guess, but then as we do these qualitative interviews and things like that, it became a lot more, the ethics committee became a lot more strict about how we get data, and obviously blurring faces and so forth and so forth. And I'm sure lots of people see that in their work today as well. And I have a feeling that that will also come into effect in the virtual space as well. So I'm just going to jump over this. And so here are the definitions that we use. So, for example, impersonalized with no idea of the voice of the company is one of the characteristics which would have made that no-go sign, no parking sign, more of a top-down, because you didn't know who said it. Rod, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, there's a comment here.
Okay.
Actually,
Sure.
two comments. So, Marcelo, hey folks, you don't need to be ashamed. You can take the phone and speak. But anyway, I'll relay your messages. Your message. So Marcelo Leal says, with your explanation, we realize how space and nature are human creations that are embodied in performance and intrinsic languages to be explored that are associated to space construction. It's not a question, it's just a comment.
It's comments, very good
summarizing
comment,
what you just said.
Yeah.
But now we have questions. Haveli, hi Haveli, says the following. What about the banknotes in India, which are labeled in over a dozen languages, 15 languages really? Are they part of the linguistic landscapes? How can we see one of, here we can see one of the notes. That's an interesting question. Banknotes. I've never seen a linguistic landscapes about money.
Wow, I think whoever said that is really touching on something that's quite exciting. Yeah, Rod, banknotes and how that is part of the landscape. Very interesting. Firstly, of course, it would be considered a sign because it has, you know, it has an inscription on it, and it has other modes and such as color and images and so forth. And then you take the banknotes, you take the picture of it, and then you have to ask yourself, okay, what's the greater context here? So is it on the kitchen table? Is it at the bank? Is it at on the street? How are you relating to this money? Are you in need of the money, or are you spending and splurging, and where are you? And so, and how much affordances, what are the affordances of this money? Or are you ashamed because you don't have a lot of money, or because your currency is not that great, for example? So there's so much that you can actually do with banknotes. To that student or that speaker, I would say, you might want to actually consider doing research on that, because I actually haven't seen anything. Rod, I don't know about you, but Branka, but I haven't seen anyone doing that.
Nothing. So Haveli, that's a very nice research topic, actually.
Your students are like,
so I mean, I have a feeling that from your workshop there will be lots of interesting papers being written.
Yay! I'm very excited.
Amiena, so what you're saying is that we have to approach linguistic science in action. Is that what you're saying? To be able to get the whole picture, how they act, what they do. Is that what you're saying? That to look at them in action, how they act and how people relate to them?
I would say so, yes, Branka. I think that is extremely important. However, I can tell you there has been lots of research done, for example, of more static science, and there is a place for it in linguistic landscape research. But this particular example of banknotes, it's so exciting because we don't know how people are actually navigating space with or without their banknotes, and how that is part of the assemblage of their own identity and how they understand themselves. For example, when I came home, so I was very fortunate in my studies that I was able to travel to a lot of European countries, and I'm so thankful for that. That was great. And I came home with all of these different coins. And so that in itself became a status symbol, if you think about it, because people would see it. And I was so proud. Okay, I was very naive. I was very young. And I was like, yes, I've got all of these notes. It's quite embarrassing when you reflect on it. But it was a sign that I had traveled. And so even though it was there in my lounge or wherever it was, my bedroom, it was a sign of mobility, and my relationship to that. Now I actually just give it to the kids. I don't even look at it anymore. But back then, with all the excitement of traveling, that was an indication of who I thought I was at that time. 10 years later, I have a very different view, and obviously COVID has also affected traveling and things like that. But yes, I think that there's so much to do there. Please don't tell anyone about it and just do it. Do the study and publish it, because I think that that is wonderful and it's very exciting. And also you can link it up to what Crispin Thurlow and, I forgot his co-author, did with, and Adam Jaworski, I believe, did with elitism, in the airports and things like that. I think that would be very exciting to look at that. Rod?
No, Haveli, the same student who mentioned the banknotes, she says, I was wondering about the use of all those languages on one note. That's the Indian currency. I think what is interesting in that case is which languages are not included in the currency, because India is extremely multilingual.
Yes,
if they place 15 languages in one banknote, hundreds of other languages won't be there. So what is the rationale to include the languages and not include the language? That's also to do with belonging, right?
100%. And if you just take a picture of the banknote and just do a study of that, and then ask people to comment on it and ask them to let you know what's the first language that pops up, that they see, that's also them in a relationship with the banknote, and with the specific languages, and it will talk to power, and hierarchization in India. And you're absolutely right. There's probably many different languages and varieties that are erased, and not deemed, I don't know, viable for the banknote. So thank you so much. I think that could be quite an amazing analysis if you just look at the banknotes itself, or even a comparison, because in South Africa we have our big five on our banknotes, and those the animals, and then we have of course Nelson Mandela. So that's like when you look at your notes, you also see the person that revolutionized that the ended apartheid, which is, for me at least, I have a wonderful relationship with my banknotes. Although I don't see them because I use card, but you get what I'm saying. So thank you so much to that speaker. That's a very, very exciting area of study. And so this is what I was talking about when I mentioned middle ground of top down and bottom up. So Coca-Cola, you might have also had it in your country, where Coca-Cola was doing like this very, very personalized branding on their tin cans, Coca-Cola cans, but they were using very local names. So people didn't actually drink from it. They actually used it as mementos. I'm not just sure, Rod, if that, and Branko, if that happened there by you as well. But it's kind of a fusion, because while it is obviously top down, we don't know who the person is that decided to do this. It's quite a lot of investment, but it is highly personalized. So you would even have a name like Kashifa or Amiena or something on the Coke cans, and it was they did quite well. They sold quite a lot more Coke cans because of that. So that is something that I would say is a bit of a middle ground and a negotiation between the buyer and the seller, because you have to actually, have your name. You want to have your name. So Kaya is not a very common name, for example, if you're in America or if you're in Brazil, I take it, but in South Africa, it's more or less common. I think I can skip over this one. Suffice to say, just very quickly, we also have signs of necessity and signs of luxury. And this also speaks to this whole idea of top down and bottom up. Necessity would obviously be low cost material, grammatical, orthographic errors, and so forth, made just so that somebody can earn a living. And then you have the more prestigious signs that you have here.
And now you just made me think of Crispin Thurlow's recent work on garbage, rubbish.
Oh,
We can also have signs of waste, right?
yes, absolutely.
That would be an interesting study where you could see rubbish cans, trash cans, where you don't see them. Well, that would be also a nice study, wouldn't it?
And what you find in them. Right?
And what you find in them, exactly.
Yeah, and I wonder in your context, how much of that would also relate back to government. I just mean in terms of how people consider waste, you know, and like in South Africa, we have, and I'm so thankful that it's not happening right now, but we have these rolling blackouts. It's worse in Johannesburg, and we had ours earlier today. So I thought, okay, that's great. So I'm not going to get cut off today. But our government has been getting a lot of flack because people are upset that they don't have electricity. And now in Johannesburg, there's a water shortage. And so you can really see the relationship between the physical environment when we can't put our lights on and the way that and the relationship with the state. And you see it in South Africa, you see it with memes because South Africans love memes. I have to have a meme assignment every year for my first years because they do so well with that. And it's topical, so it changes every year, but it's quite exciting. I'm going to skip over some of these because I want to get to later research. Just to say, this is actually my son, and during the level 5 lockdown, because nobody was moving, the front part of my house became an extended part of my lounge, and so I didn't have to worry about someone, you know, kidnapping my child and anything terrible like that, because nobody was walking the streets. There was nobody at the door looking for food, which happens quite a lot. Lots of people ask for food and things like that, but we didn't have any of that. And so you can see the play area actually extended outwards. And so one of the questions that I ask students is, how has your space changed during the lockdown, where perhaps you never used a room before, but now because you're locked in, you have to use a room for something else? And also in Cape Town, because we are the fittest province of South Africa, everybody started buying home equipment because nobody wanted to pick up COVID weight. But of course, that did happen to a lot of people. But suffice to say, that was a concern. But it's interesting how the shops, because I was one of them, the shops emptied of home equipment, fitness equipment, just before level 5 started. So I don't know if that happened to you guys. Let me know what was the thing that most people bought. Hopefully it wasn't alcohol, but it was alcohol for some people, I have to say, unfortunately, in Cape Town. Again, I can't see your comments yet, but I am listening out if you have any comments. Okay, so we've been speaking a lot about place and space. And so, again, it's how the human being creates space that's important. And skinscapes had to do with the body as a physical sort of materiality in which we can see how, in which the landscape is created. And so what was interesting, as I said before, is that it's not just marks on the body, it's also the unmarked spaces on the body, which are in fact marked, that we figured out in our research. So one of the methodologies that we've came up with was, and this was my student, Sean Nehru, was that we gave this image, and in hindsight, we would have preferred participants drawing their own image of a woman, because it was based on female bodies. And basically they could use 3 pens only: green, blue, and red. Green was for existing tattoos, blue was for future tattoos, and red was for unwanted areas for tattooing. And when we superimposed the images, the one place that was quite clearly a no-go zone was the face. Perhaps this is unsurprising, but it does speak to how the body is mapped and how we don't even realize that an unmarked face is in fact belongs to a particular social class or social world that we see ourselves in. So if there are any questions, this was an exciting study and paper, and it really started with Brigitte Busch's work on the linguistic repertoire. And so she looked at language as children who'd inscribe it on a figure of a body. So it was really quite exciting work. But let's bring us now to the virtual space. And I don't think I have time to go through this particular study. If you want to go through it, it's already in print, I think last year. So we looked at myself and Amy Hiss. We looked at Black bodies online and how they reclaimed space through their natural hair, through speaking isiXhosa, which was denied. They were not allowed to speak an African language. And the students were called gorillas and hyenas because of their wanting to wear their hair naturally. So I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but because of the pencil test, which I think I've spoken about before in a different talk in Brazil, that made women especially very conscious about their hair. So if you took a pen and you put it in your hair and it didn't fall out, then you were considered Black. So that was a huge sort of differentiating marker of your identity. And then that put you on a particular track, for example, to have less in South Africa, because of course Black people were given the lowest status. So that was quite an exciting study, and we looked at the virtual space. We followed the hashtags. So if you are somebody and that is always online, I always tell my students, go where you go normally when you want to do linguistic landscape research. If you are mostly online, figure out what the hashtags are that you follow, who you follow, what it is that you're interested in, and start analyzing that. You don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you do have to make the wheel look exciting. And you do that by following your own interests. And so these hashtags were quite exciting. And we saw the relationship between the students and the fees must fall university students at the time, which were they were amazing Twitter, how shall I say this? They were advocates for the cause on Twitter. So polymedia is something sure.
Chime in here. So sure. Haveli mentions, has a comment here. It's just actually a comment. I was thinking about Barcelona the last time I was there in 2019. It has invested in the protection of bilingualism with particular regard to the introduction of measures aimed at ensuring the normalization of the Basque language. I think it's Catalan. Was it Basque or Catalan? I don't know. Well, everywhere you could see English is Spanish, and I guess it's Catalan because it's Barcelona.
In Barcelona, yeah.
But especially Catalan. So I think that's an interesting example of a top-down approach that is used to promote the local culture, not just to repress it. Right?
As in New Zealand too, with Maori language, right?
No, absolutely. I think this would be an example of the top-down sort of signs that people see that the state or those in power put into effect because they are attempting to normalize a particular view or culture. You're absolutely right.
I just wanted to highlight something that Amiena just said that I think it's hugely useful for everyone who is doing a master's or a PhD thesis. He just said, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but you have to make, you should make the wheel more interesting. I think that's good advice for anyone doing a master's or a PhD, because sometimes students get really anxious about doing something extremely innovative that nobody has written about, and that blocks them from doing what they can do. So that's a generally useful advice for everyone who does research, and to us also.
Yeah,
absolutely.
You come up with interesting data, right?
Absolutely. And I think when you study something that you're actually interested in, the reader, the examiners, they go on that journey with you. And so I always, and also, I guess it's a bit of an aside, but as a supervisor, I know that Rod and Branko, you will definitely agree with me. There's a relationship there of building a professional academic. And one way that you do it is authentically being who you are and not just towing the line and doing what everybody else is doing, but doing something that you actually love. So that's important. Rod, did you want to add something?
No, I just wanted to highlight that this is fantastic advice to anyone, and to like even more senior researchers.
Yes, we'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, really. Well, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but make it interesting. That's what we have to do.
Yes, definitely. And one of the things that we are looking at now when it comes to the virtual space is not just looking at Rod's, for example, Facebook page and YouTube, but what are the differences? What do you do that's different on YouTube that you don't do on Instagram versus Facebook? So there's a relationship that the human being has with those platforms. And so that shift is in itself is very interesting, and that's what I want to get to. But is there any other comment before I go there? Rod? Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, awesome. So this is a lot of different ways, a lot of pictures of myself, but it's only because it's my YouTube channel, okay? But what I speak about in a recent paper is how space becomes meaningful online, okay? And so for those of you that have YouTube channels, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and there's a lot of content. You become a content creator. It's very different. But everything that I was doing here was for myself, but I'd never thought about it in terms of the virtual linguistic landscape. And when my colleague Quentin Williams told me, you know what, Amiena, there's a lot of rich data there, I almost killed him, because I said to him, no, this is not data, this is my life. And he's a dear friend of mine. And then he sat down with me and he said, well, how is it that you are there, and how is it that you connect with students? And so he wanted to know about it, and then it forced me to really think about myself in relation to the place that I had built my home, which was YouTube. And so while I can't speak to it here, I've done an analysis of my most viewed, most liked video. And unfortunately, it was on a topic I did not want any one of you to ever hear about. It was just my own sort of disclosure in a very personal space, which was YouTube. But it was on my own drug past. And I did this autoethnography. So I think it's just Rebecca that spoke about it. So I did an autoethnography on my coming out about my own drug past. And it was also a defining moment for me, because I wasn't just in YouTube in a space, but I was making it meaningful, not only for myself, but the aim was also to make it meaningful for those that were on the journey of recovery from drug abuse. And so there were different levels of placemaking that I looked at. How I made my own place on YouTube was definitely through vulnerability. So for the person that asked about emotion, yeah, that's super important. To bring yourself, in this case, into the picture, but also how I made place for others on my YouTube channel. So I did that through the generative theory of linguistic citizenship, which I don't think I have time to talk about today, but I will definitely share material on this with Rod if there are any students that are interested, or you can just come and join me on Instagram. I'm at Amiena Inspired, and I would love to meet you there. And then I also talk about how the academic space is reconstituted in the moment of retelling. So I have, and Rod would know this, a paper coming out in Language and Gender, but also I did a presentation on this particular video at the Linguistic Landscape 12 conference. And then another way that place is made is through the audience, it's through you. So once you've watched something, you also have an opportunity to reject, agree, or add to your own add your own narratives to a place. So this is what I was talking about, autoethnography. It's a wonderful way. I think it's the next step for linguistic landscaping for those that are interested in doing it. It's not for everyone. Some people prefer other methods, but this for me is was quite just amazingly liberating. So it's both a process and a product, and you can't just tell a story, so you can't just say anything, but you have to actually link it to a macro issue, and you need to make it accessible, and you have to make it interesting. And so that requires bringing all of yourself, and not just the academic, but the mother and the sister and the previous drug addict, and all of those parts of you. You have to bring that in order to create a narrative that people can hold on to. And so, Rod, is there a question or comment?
No, there's no question, but I just would like to comment on your gender and language paper. It's absolutely fantastic. I've read it very recently, thank you, and it will be out in the next issue. So everyone watch out for gender and language. Amiena has a fantastic autoethnography there.
Thank you. And you can even see by my reaction, I'm still getting to grips with the fact that in the academic space, in order for space to be made meaningful, I had to be vulnerable, I had to be real, and that required analyzing, and this was the moment of retelling. So firstly, thank you to Gender and Language, because that allowed me to actually speak for the first time on that topic. And then also in the Linguistic Landscape 12, and you can see some of the contributors here, the other contributors that we know very well, Ilana Shami and Tomasa Milani and so forth. And so that was quite an experience, because I had no idea that in the moment of retelling, I would myself become vulnerable, and my voice was trembling, and yes, but it needed to be done. So one of the things that I found out with regards to placemaking for others on YouTube was that by using linguistic citizenship, which I'll just tell everybody, yes, I haven't defined it previously, is that for me, it's the creation of belonging within yourself. So belonging to yourself, feeling comfortable in your own skin, and creating a space for others to belong as well. So Stroud and Pendo kind of talk about being able to cross points of perceived difference in order to create new ways of being, new socialities, okay? So even though I'm no longer, I haven't abused drugs in so many hundreds of years, but in that moment of retelling, I had to go back there in order to reach somebody else who is on that journey of recovery, or maybe just starting. And so my body became a locus of enunciation, action, and agency. And there was a visceral charge of language. If you read through the paper and you see the way I speak about the aches and pains and the vomiting and all of those other things, it's actually quite gross. But it oopsie, let me just do that. But it was, like I said before, something that I had to speak about it, because it came with the body, it came with the story. So the digital space was made meaningful through vulnerability and openness, and also widens the scope of what it means to be a drug addict in Cape Town. So remember, I am a Muslim academic woman. I'm now a mother. I wasn't a mother back then. And so this is a very different image from the rough and tough gangster, colored Cape Townian image, that person that's a male that's out there. So it's a new narrative to remind us that, of course, we can have other ways of looking at this particular topic, and hopefully do that with compassion and not with hatred. So that was the aim.
But
Okay.
Amiena, I was wondering, it's just a comment that this kind of research, autoethnography, will have to struggle against mainstream approaches, which are oriented by ideologies of neutrality, objectivism, separation. So not all journals would accept, for example, papers like this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's, especially in social sciences, there's been like a wholesale adoption of trying to be exactly like the hard sciences, like we are scientific, we are neutral, we erase ourselves as much as we can from the thesis. And I mean, I know students watching are like, yes, we do that. We say the researcher when we're actually talking about ourselves. And I think there's a place for that. But I also think that as linguistic landscape researchers, we are telling a story. And if we are comfortable and willing to take that step, and that's not for everyone, and I'm quite fine with it not being for everyone, because I don't want to push people to do things that they're not comfortable with. But there is room for autoethnography in linguistic landscape research if we understand that we are all storytellers, and we tell our stories through quantitative analysis, we tell it through multimodal analysis, and we could, if we like, tell it through an autoethnography as well. And if you think about it, even when we have our theoretical framings, and we are as neutral and as scientific as we want to be, even the theories we use that inform our research speaks to who we are. So we are always there, but autoethnography puts us front facing, and there's no hiding. And I feel like for some researchers, that is something that we need to do and that we can do. And so there is space for it, but there is quite a lot of people that would, I agree with you, Branka, push back and say, no, this is too subjective. But yeah, that's one of those hiccups. Rod?
No, I was just saying that one of the things that inspires me in linguistic landscape, in the field, or in this endeavor, it's not, I don't know, is that it's quite open to methodological imagination. So you can, for example, autoethnography is something that might become a trend, but now some people do walking as a methodology too.
Yes.
There are even books about that. It's so interesting, walking as a methodology.
Yeah,
and Branka and I wrote a paper based on a walking tour that we did in Rio.
Lovely. And and the thing is, what you're doing is you're bringing in yourself. Well, if you're walking, somebody's doing the walking, right? So that is you. And I would argue that that is critical for us to really understand the texture of the landscape, to really get in there. We require the human being to walk, and autoethnography pushes us further, and it requires the human being to talk and to feel and to regret and to admit where they went wrong. And my disclosure on YouTube was the first time that my family had ever heard of my drug abuse. So there were real life material consequences. I'm laughing now, but of course that was a terrible, terrible time. My poor husband loves me very much, but he also had to take a lot of flack, because why would I put it out there? And at the end of the day, I told my family, like, I had to do it because in order to be real, I had to just take that halo off my head. Everyone thinks of me in a certain way. I just couldn't handle it anymore, because I wanted to reach people and let them know that they can also change. And so there were material consequences for that decision. And also, even academically or professionally, I was flagged by the American consulate because I was honest. And I told them, well, yes, I did drugs in my formative years, and I wouldn't have said it had I not had a YouTube video, you see. So I had to be honest in that space. So there are material consequences for this disclosure. And in a recent talk in Finland on this particular topic, someone was concerned about me because this could also have other implications. And at the end of the day, I had to make a choice as to whether I was willing to live with the consequences or live in the shadow of myself. And I chose, I'll live with the consequences. So thankfully, I live in South Africa where we have a lot of freedom and a lot of rights. Anyway, and so we don't have to go into this because I think we're definitely over time. So this is for the students that can even go through it themselves. I've written it out here, what these concepts are all about, but I think it's honorable mentions, as I've said. And also, we can definitely continue this conversation in different platforms if there is interest by the students and colleagues and those watching this YouTube video afterwards. Hopefully we can talk more about how to expand the field and keep it current, keep it relevant, and keep it exciting for everyone. So thank you, Rod and Branka. I'm just going to stop sharing.
Thank you, Amiena. So questions from the audience? You can either write on the comment section or just speak up, show yourselves.
Don't be shy, unless you're wearing pajamas.
Bruni,
I'm halfway.
Hi, Bruni.
I'm half
Bruni
in my
says,
pajamas. Yeah.
Sorry. Bruni says excellent.
Oh, thank
Bruni
you so
is my
much.
student.
Yay! I saw a few of you followed me on Instagram. I'll just say thank you so much.
Gilermando says great lecture.
Yay!
Yeah.
Well, I think quite a few nice ideas for papers and new research objects like money.
I'm so jealous.
Like money, the linguistic landscapes of lockdown.
Definitely. I think you've got a great bunch of students here.
They are fantastic. So I think, Amiena, you have inspired them
to
do some linguistic landscape research. I guess so.
Okay.
And Amiena, you have, thank you. I forgot about the pain and my discomfort, so thank you.
Oh, that's good.
And what was really striking to me was the fact that you brought in cave paintings. And I don't know, I think that provides food for thought, because I was thinking, can we consider what they did, what cave paintings as signs? Because there was no language as we know it at the time. So maybe that provides food for thought. I'll keep thinking about it. Maybe. Rodrigo, let's write about it. I don't know.
Okay, paintings. That could be nice.
But first you must come to South Africa and see the cave paintings, because it's lovely to have you guys. Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Some of them are really sophisticated, and one of them, it really seems that it's telling a narrative. But if we really think about it, can we consider it a narrative? Because there was no language at the time. Language as we know it, maybe there was some kind of communication. So I kept thinking about it. Thank you for this, because it's really challenging. So I'll think about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, for us with our students, we always tell them